Police dog kept alerting to wrong evidence for months. Then a mute 10-year-old girl revealed the shocking truth. For 8 months, German Shepherd Ace had been trying to tell everyone something, but nobody understood what he was desperately trying to communicate. During crime scene investigations, he'd alert to evidence that didn't match the case. During court meetings, his behavior would change around certain people. The detectives dismissed it as confusion, but Ace knew something they didn't. The real killer was sitting right there among them, hiding behind a badge and a suit. The only witness who could expose the truth was 10-year-old Sarah Martinez, and she hadn't spoken since witnessing her mother's murder. But this police dog and this silent little girl shared a connection that would ultimately save an innocent man's life and reveal a conspiracy that shocked everyone. What you're about to hear is the incredible true story of how loyalty, courage, and an unbreakable bond between a child and a dog brought justice when the system failed. 10-year-old Sarah Martinez snuggled deeper into her favorite purple pajamas, her small fingers tracing the worn edges of her beloved copy of Charlotte's Web. The soft glow of her bedside lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls of her cozy bedroom, where hand-drawn pictures of butterflies and rainbows decorated every available surface. Her mother, Elena, sat on the edge of the bed, her gentle voice weaving magic through the familiar words they'd read together countless times before. "Some pig," Elena read aloud, her dark eyes twinkling with the same warmth that had tucked Sarah in every night for as long as she could remember. That's what the Web said, and Wilbur's fame spread throughout the countryside. Sarah giggled softly, pointing to the illustration of Charlotte spinning her web. "Mommy, do you think spiders really are that smart?" "I think," Elena said, brushing a strand of Sarah's dark hair behind her ear, "that sometimes the smallest creatures can do the biggest, most important things. Just like my little girl."
She pressed a tender kiss to Sarah's forehead. "What do you think Charlotte would write about you in her web?" Sarah's eyes grew thoughtful. "Maybe some daughter." Elena's laughter filled the room like musical notes. Perfect. Some daughter it would definitely be. She closed the book gently and placed it on the nightstand next to Sarah's collection of smooth stones and seashells. "Now, my beautiful girl, it's time for dreams. Sweet dreams about talking spiders and loyal friends."
"Will you leave the hall light on?" Sarah asked, the question part of their nightly ritual. "Always," Elena promised, just as she had every night. The hardwood floor. Sarah listened to her mother's soft footsteps padding down the hallway, followed by the familiar sounds of their evening routine, dishes clinking in the kitchen, the television murmuring quietly in the living room, the gentle hum of their old refrigerator. Sarah was just drifting into that peaceful space between wake and sleep when the sound shattered the tranquility of their home. Crash! The noise of breaking glass exploded through the house like a thunderclap, sending Sarah's heart hammering against her ribs. She bolted upright in bed, her eyes wide and searching in the dim light. For a moment she wondered if she'd dreamed it. Maybe it was just the wind knocking over one of her mother's potted plants on the back porch. But then she heard her mother's voice, sharp and afraid. "Who's there? I'm calling the police." Terror, cold and paralyzing, gripped Sarah's chest. Without thinking, she rolled off her bed and scrambled underneath it. Pressing her small body against the wall, the space smelled of dust and forgotten toys, but it felt safe, hidden. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she listened to the terrifying sounds coming from downstairs. Heavy footsteps, a man's voice, rough and angry though she couldn't make out the words. her mother pleading, crying. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut and covered her ears, but she couldn't block out the sounds completely. Then came the scream, high-pitched, desperate, and unmistakably her mother's voice. Sarah's whole world seemed to tilt sideways. She pressed her hands harder against her ears, but the scream seemed to echo inside her head, bouncing around her skull like a trapped bird. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, an eerie silence fell over the house. Sarah lay frozen under her bed, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. Her pajamas were damp with sweat, and her legs had started to cramp from staying so still. Then she heard the back door slam. Curiosity and desperate hope warred with her fear. Maybe the bad person was gone. Maybe her mother was okay and would come upstairs any minute to check on her. Sarah inched toward the edge of her bed, peering out through the crack in her bedroom door toward the staircase. A shadow moved across the hallway below. Tall, broad-shouldered, definitely not her mother. Sarah caught a glimpse of a dark jacket, something distinctive about its pattern that her frightened mind tried to memorize, even as every instinct screamed at her to hide. The figure moved quickly but deliberately, as if he knew exactly where he was going. The back door slammed again, and then nothing. Sarah waited under her bed until her legs went completely numb. She waited until the digital clock on her nightstand glowed, 11:47 p.m., then midnight, then 12:15 a.m. Finally, when she couldn't stand the not knowing any longer, she crawled out from her hiding place on shaking hands and knees. "Mommy?" she whispered into the darkness. No answer. "Mommy?" A little louder this time, her voice cracking with unshed tears. Still nothing. Sarah crept to the top of the stairs, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The house felt different somehow, colder, emptier, as if something essential had been drained out of it. She could see broken glass glittering in the moonlight that streamed through the back door's shattered window. "Mommy, I'm scared," she called down, hoping against hope for her mother's reassuring voice. But when Sarah finally found the courage to go downstairs, she discovered her mother lying motionless on the kitchen floor, surrounded by scattered papers and overturned chairs. Elena's eyes were closed, and there was so much red. On the floor, on the white kitchen cabinets, on her mother's yellow sweater. Sarah's world didn't just change in that moment, it completely shattered. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, her hands hovering helplessly over Elena's still form. "Mommy, wake up. Please wake up." But somewhere deep in her 10-year-old heart, she already knew that her mother would never wake up again. The police sirens arrived 20 minutes later, after Mrs. Henderson from next door had spotted the broken glass and called 911. By the time the officers broke down the front door, they found Sarah sitting silently beside her mother's body, tears streaming down her face, but no sounds coming from her throat. "Hey there, sweetheart," Officer Martinez said gently, kneeling beside the traumatized little girl. "Can you tell me your name?" Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She tried again, forcing air through her vocal cords, but it was as if some invisible hand was squeezing her throat shut. The words were there, her name, what she'd seen, the desperate need to tell someone about the man in the jacket, but they were trapped inside her, unreachable. "It's okay, honey," Officer Martinez said softly. "You don't have to talk right now. We're going to take care of you." But Sarah wanted to talk. She needed to tell them about the shadow, about the jacket, about everything she'd witnessed. She tried and tried until her throat felt raw and her head pounded, but the words simply wouldn't come. The silence that had fallen over their house that terrible night had somehow settled into Sarah's voice, stealing it away just when she needed it most. The next morning brought a parade of strangers through Sarah's home: police officers, detectives, crime scene technicians, and the medical examiner. Sarah sat curled up on the living room couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like hospital disinfectant, watching as people in uniform photographed everything and carefully placed items into plastic bags. Detective Rosa Martinez, no relation to Sarah, though she'd introduced herself with a kind smile and mentioned the coincidence, pulled up a chair directly across from the silent little girl. With warm brown eyes and gentle hands that she kept folded in her lap while she talked. "Hi, Sarah. I know yesterday was incredibly scary and confusing," Detective Martinez began, her voice soft and patient. "I want you to know that everyone here is working really hard to find out what happened to your mommy. But we need your help, okay?" Sarah nodded, her eyes wide and trusting despite everything. "I know talking might be hard right now, and that's completely normal," the detective continued. "Sometimes, after something really frightening happens, our voices need time to come back. But there are other ways we can communicate, right?" Detective Martinez reached into her bag and pulled out a set of colored pencils and a sketch pad. Sarah's eyes immediately brightened. She'd always loved to draw, spending hours creating elaborate pictures of fairy tale castles and magical forests. "Can you draw me a picture of what you remember from last night?" Detective Martinez asked, gently. "Anything at all. It doesn't matter how small, or if you think it's important. Sometimes the littlest details can help us the most." Sarah took the pencils with trembling fingers. The yellow one felt familiar and comforting in her hand as she began to sketch. She drew her house first, the familiar outline she'd doodled hundreds of times in school notebooks. Then she added the broken glass at the back door, carefully shading in each jagged piece. Detective Martinez watched patiently as Sarah's drawing evolved. A figure appeared near the back door, tall and dark, with broad shoulders and something Sarah kept going back to color and recolor on the figure's chest. "That's very good, Sarah," the detective said encouragingly. "Can you tell me more about this person? Was it someone you recognized?" Sarah shook her head vigorously, then pointed to the colored area on the figure's chest and made a gesture like she was trying to show a pattern of some kind. Before Detective Martinez could ask more questions, a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the window, Sarah could see a police van pulling up, and her heart skipped as she watched a beautiful German shepherd jump down from the vehicle, followed by a tall Asian officer in uniform. "That's Officer Chen and his partner, Ace," Detective Martinez explained, noticing Sarah's sudden interest. "Ace is a very special dog. He helps us solve cases by using his incredible sense of smell. Would you like to meet him?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, the first real emotion she'd shown since the police arrived. Officer Chen approached the house with Ace at his side, the dog's intelligent brown eyes scanning everything with professional intensity. Chen was a 10-year veteran of the K9 unit, with graying temples and kind eyes that seemed— "And this handsome fellow is Ace." Ace was magnificent. His coat was thick and glossy. His ears stood at perfect attention, and something in his calm demeanor immediately put Sarah at ease. While the humans talked about evidence and search patterns, Ace's eyes found Sarah's and seemed to look right into her soul. "Ace is going to help us look for clues," Officer Chen explained to Sarah. "He can smell things that we humans can't detect, sometimes even things that are days or weeks old. Is it okay if he looks around your house?" Sarah nodded, but she couldn't take her eyes off Ace. There was something about the dog that made her feel less alone, less afraid. When Ace looked at her, she didn't feel like a victim or a witness or a poor little girl who'd lost her mother. She felt understood. Officer Chen gave Ace the command to search, and Sarah watched in fascination as the dog immediately went to work. Ace moved through the crime scene with purpose and precision, his nose working constantly as he investigated every corner, every surface, every shadow. In the kitchen, Ace paused at the spot where Elena's body had been found. His whole body went rigid, and he began what Officer Chen called alerting, a specific behavior that indicated he'd found something significant. But instead of stopping there, Ace continued his search pattern, eventually making his way to the broken photo frame that had been knocked off the side table during the struggle. The frame held Sarah's school picture from the previous year, her gap-toothed smile beaming out from behind cracked glass. Ace sniffed carefully around the frame's edges, then sat down and looked directly at Officer Chen with an expression that clearly said, "This is important." "Good boy, Ace," Officer Chen praised, carefully bagging the frame as evidence. "What did you find here, buddy?" Sarah watched this interaction with growing amazement. Ace wasn't just a dog. He was like a detective with 4 legs and a tail. And somehow, watching him work made her feel like maybe, just maybe, they really would be able to find the person who had hurt her mother. As if sensing her thoughts, Ace finished his evidence search and padded over to where Sarah sat on the couch. He approached slowly, giving her plenty of time to react, then gently rested his massive head on her knee. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. For the first time since finding her mother, she felt a flicker of something other than terror and grief. Tentatively, she reached out and touched Ace's soft fur, running her fingers through the thick coat behind his ears. Ace's tail wagged slowly, and he pressed closer to Sarah, as if he understood that she needed comfort more than anything else in the world. In that moment, surrounded by crime scene tape and evidence bag, neither she nor the investigators noticed the small piece of dark fabric caught on the rose bush beside the back door. A fragment that matched the pattern Sarah had tried so desperately to capture in her drawing. The most crucial evidence was hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. 3 days after the funeral, Sarah stood in the doorway of her grandmother's spare bedroom, holding a small suitcase that contained everything she had left in the world. Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, Grandma Ellie, as Sarah had always called her, waited patiently as her granddaughter took in her new surroundings. The room was painted a soft lavender color, with white lace curtains that filtered the afternoon sunlight into dancing patterns on the hardwood floor. Grandma Ellie had clearly tried to make the space welcoming. There were fresh flowers on the dresser, a cozy reading chair by the window, and some of Sarah's favorite books arranged on the nightstand. But it wasn't home, and both of them knew it. "I know it's not the same as your room at home, sweetheart," Grandma Ellie said gently, her silver hair catching the light as she knelt down to Sarah's eye level. "But I hope you'll feel comfortable here. We can redecorate however you'd like, paint the walls, get new curtains, whatever would make you happy." Sarah nodded politely, but her eyes remained distant and sad. She'd been staying with her grandmother since the night of the murder, but somehow moving her belongings here made everything feel more permanent, more real. Her mother was never coming back. This was her life now. Grandma Ellie had been Elena's mother, and at 68, she possessed the same gentle warmth that had made Sarah's mother so special. Her house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, and every surface seemed to hold family photographs spanning decades of birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments that now felt impossibly precious. The next morning brought Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a soft voice, carrying a leather bag full of art supplies, puzzles, and what she called feelings tools. Sarah has what we call selective mutism, Dr. Williams explained to Grandma Ellie, while Sarah sat nearby, coloring in a mandala design that was supposed to be calming. It's not that she can't speak. Her vocal cords are perfectly fine, but the trauma she experienced has created a psychological barrier. Her mind is protecting her by shutting down verbal communication. Grandma Ellie wrung her hands, her eyes filled with worry. How long, will she ever talk again? That's when Dr. Williams introduced Sarah to what would become her primary means of expression: drawing. Not just casual sketching, but detailed, purposeful artwork that could convey complex thoughts and emotions. Art therapy isn't just about pretty pictures, Dr. Williams explained during their first session. It's about giving your feelings a place to go when words aren't available. Can you show me how you're feeling today, Sarah? Sarah considered the question seriously, then picked up a black crayon. She drew a small figure standing in the middle of a vast empty space. A tiny girl, surrounded by overwhelming darkness. But then she added something unexpected, a small dot of yellow in the corner of the paper. "Tell me about this part," Dr. Williams said, pointing to the yellow dot. Sarah picked up more crayons and began to add details to the dot. It became a sun, then a window, then somehow evolved into the shape of a dog. A German shepherd, to be specific, with intelligent eyes and a noble bearing. "Is this someone you know?" Dr. Williams asked, gently. Sarah nodded, then wrote carefully at the bottom of the paper, "Ace." Over the following weeks, Ace appeared in nearly every drawing Sarah created. Sometimes he was searching for clues, sometimes he was sitting beside the small figure that represented Sarah, and sometimes he seemed to be leading her somewhere important. Dr. Williams noted this pattern with professional interest, but what she didn't realize was that Sarah was trying to communicate something specific about that terrible night. In drawing after drawing, Sarah depicted the same shadowy figure she'd tried to show, Detective Martinez. She drew him over and over, always focusing on that distinctive pattern on his jacket, always placing him near the back door of her house. But the adults interpreted these recurring images as Sarah's mind trying to process the trauma, not as attempts to provide crucial information about the crime. Grandma Ellie proved to be remarkably patient and intuitive when it came to understanding Sarah's non-verbal communication. She learned to read her granddaughter's expressions, to interpret the different types of sighs and gestures, and to understand what each drawing meant in the context of Sarah's daily needs and emotions. "Good morning, sunshine," Grandma Ellie would say each day, setting out breakfast and watching for Sarah's response. A small smile meant Sarah was having a good day. Downcast eyes meant she'd had nightmares again. A certain tilt of her head meant she wanted to work on a puzzle together. But perhaps the most challenging test of their new life together came when it was time for Sarah to start school again. Roosevelt Elementary was a small, friendly school where Sarah had been a popular, chatty student before the tragedy. Now, walking through the familiar hallways felt like moving through a foreign country where she didn't speak the language. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's had been briefed about the situation and did her best to prepare the other children. But when Sarah walked into the classroom that first day, 20 pairs of curious eyes turned to stare at her, and she felt her throat close up even tighter than before.
"Class, I'd like you to welcome Sarah back,"
Mrs. Patterson said warmly.
"She's been through a difficult time, and she might not be talking very much right now, but I know we'll all do our best to make her feel included and supported."
Sarah took her seat, the same desk by the window where she'd sat since the beginning of the school year. Her former best friend, Jessica, turned around and whispered,
"Hi, Sarah. I'm really glad you're back. Do you want to sit with me at lunch?"
Sarah opened her mouth to answer. Of course she wanted to sit with Jessica. She'd missed her friend terribly. But the words just wouldn't come. Instead, she could only nod and offer a weak smile. As the days went by, Sarah watched her classmates gradually stop trying to include her in conversations. It wasn't that they were mean. They just didn't know how to interact with someone who couldn't respond with words. During recess, she often sat alone on the swings, drawing in a sketchbook, while the other children played games that required talking and laughing and all the vocal expressions that had been stolen from her. But even in her isolation, Sarah continued to draw the same mysterious figure, the same shadowy man in the distinctive jacket. She drew him at home, she drew him at school, she drew him during therapy sessions. The image was burned into her memory, and she was desperate to make someone understand its importance. Unfortunately, every adult who saw these drawings interpreted them the same way as Sarah's traumatized mind trying to process what she'd witnessed. No one realized that she was trying to solve her mother's murder, one crayon stroke at a time. Late at night, when Grandma Ellie thought she was asleep, Sarah would lie in her new bedroom and think about Ace. She remembered how the dog had looked at her with those knowing eyes, how he'd found something important on that broken picture frame, how his presence had made her feel less alone in a world that suddenly made no sense. Somehow, Sarah knew that Ace understood things the humans were missing, and deep in her heart, she began to nurture a small but growing hope that someday, somehow, she and Ace would find a way to make sure the right person paid for what happened to her mother. The silence that had taken her voice was frustrating and lonely, but Sarah was learning that there were other ways to communicate, and that sometimes the most important truths couldn't be spoken with words anyway. They had to be discovered, one careful clue at a time. 6 months had passed since that terrible night, and Sarah's world had settled into a quiet routine of school, therapy sessions, and evenings spent drawing at Seasons had changed from the crisp autumn when her mother died to a hopeful spring, but Sarah still felt frozen in that moment of devastating silence. Detective Martinez had called the night before, asking if Sarah and her grandmother could come to the police station for an update on the case. Sarah's stomach had twisted with nervous anticipation. She desperately wanted news about finding her mother's killer, but she also dreaded these official meetings, where adults spoke around her as if she weren't there. "Remember, sweetheart," Grandma Ellie said, as they walked through the glass doors of the Riverside Police Department. "Detective Martinez just wants to keep us informed. There's no pressure for you to do anything except listen." The police station bustled with activity even on this quiet Tuesday afternoon. Officers moved purposefully through the corridors. Phones rang constantly, and the air hummed with the serious business of law enforcement. Sarah clutched her ever-present sketchbook against her chest, finding comfort in its familiar weight. They were waiting in the lobby for Detective Martinez when Sarah heard a sound that made her heart leap, the distinctive click of dog nails on linoleum flooring. She turned toward the sound and felt her breath catch in her throat. There was Ace, walking down the hallway with Officer Chen, both of them moving with the confident precision that Sarah remembered from that awful day. But this time, instead of searching a crime scene, they seemed to be engaged in some kind of training exercise. Ace carried himself with noble dignity, his intelligent eyes scanning the environment while staying focused on his handler. The moment Ace spotted Sarah across the lobby, everything changed. His ears perked forward, his tail began a gentle wag, and he looked directly at Officer Chen, as if asking permission for something. It was as though he remembered her perfectly, not just as another witness from a case, but as someone special who needed his attention. "Well, I'll be," Officer Chen said, following Ace's gaze across the lobby. "Hey there, Sarah. I wasn't expecting to see you today." Sarah's eyes locked with Ace's, and she felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't experienced in months. Genuine excitement. Without consciously deciding to move, she took a step toward the dog, then another, until she was standing directly in front of him. "Ace, sit," Officer Chen commanded, and the German Shepherd immediately dropped into a perfect sitting position. But his eyes never left Sarah's face, and his tail continued its slow, welcoming wag against the polished floor. "Is it okay if Sarah says hello?" Grandma Ellie asked. I've seen Ace interact with hundreds of people, but never quite like this. The dog's entire demeanor had softened, his usual alert professionalism replaced by something gentler, more personal. "Absolutely," Chen said. "Ace seems to remember you very well, Sarah. Would you like to pet him?" Sarah nodded eagerly and knelt down in front of Ace, extending her hand for him to sniff. The dog's nose worked delicately over her fingers, reacquainting himself with her scent, and then he leaned forward to nuzzle her palm with his wet nose. "Hello, Ace," Sarah whispered, so quietly that only the dog could hear her. "I missed you." Officer Chen's eyes widened in surprise, but he was careful not to react dramatically. Grandma Ellie, standing a few feet away, didn't catch the whispered words, but she noticed the complete transformation in Sarah's posture and expression. "Good boy," Sarah continued in that same soft whisper, running her fingers through Ace's thick fur. "You're such a good boy. Do you remember me?" Ace's response was immediate and unmistakable. He leaned into Sarah's touch, his tail wagging more enthusiastically, and he made a soft sound, not quite a whine, more like a gentle vocalization of recognition and affection. Officer Chen felt his heart skip a beat. He'd witnessed something extraordinary. This traumatized child who hadn't spoken to a human being in 6 months was having a conversation with his dog. And Ace, who was trained to be professional and focused during work hours, was responding to Sarah as if she were his long-lost best friend. "Sarah," Chen said carefully, kneeling down to join them on the floor. "Ace really seems to like you. We were just finishing up some training exercises. Would you like to watch him work?" Sarah looked up at Officer Chen and nodded enthusiastically. For the first time since the tragedy, there was genuine light in her dark eyes. "Stay close," Sarah whispered to Ace, and amazingly, the dog seemed to understand. As Officer Chen led them to a quieter area of the station, Ace walked directly beside Sarah, occasionally looking up at her as if checking to make sure she was okay. In the training room, Officer Chen set up a simple exercise. Several cardboard boxes arranged around the space, with one containing a small evidence bag with a specific scent. "This is basic scent detection work," he explained to Sarah and her grandmother. "Ace has to find the box with the target scent and alert me to its location." "Find it, Ace," Chen commanded, and the dog immediately went to work. Sarah watched in fascination as Ace moved systematically from box to box, his nose working constantly. When he reached the correct box, he sat down and looked directly at Officer Chen. The alert behavior Sarah remembered from her house that terrible night. "Good boy, Ace," Chen praised, and Ace's tail wagged with pride. "Show me again," Sarah whispered to Ace, and incredibly the dog looked at her as if he understood. He stood up, walked back to the starting position, and looked expectantly between Sarah and Officer Chen. "I think he wants to do it again," Chen said with amazement. "Sarah, would you like to give him the command?" Sarah looked nervous but excited. "Find it, Ace," she whispered, and the dog immediately began his search pattern again, as if her quiet voice carried the same authority as Officer Chen's official commands. As they watched Ace work, Sarah began making soft sounds of encouragement. "Good job," and "You're so smart," and "That's right, Ace," all in whispers that only the dog could hear clearly. But Officer Chen caught enough to realize something remarkable was happening. When the training session ended, Sarah was reluctant to leave Ace's side. She sat on the floor with the dog, stroking his fur and whispering things that made his ears perk forward with interest. "Would you like to play a game with him?" Officer Chen asked, sensing Sarah's reluctance to part ways. Sarah nodded eagerly, and Chen showed her how to hide a treat in her hand and let Ace find it. "Put your hands behind your back," he instructed, "and Ace will use his nose to figure out which hand has the treat." Sarah giggled, when Ace gently nuzzled her right hand, and she revealed the hidden treat. They played the game several times, and with each successful round, Sarah's whispers became slightly more confident. "You're the smartest dog ever," she told Ace during their last game. "I wish I could see you every day." Officer Chen made a decision that would change both their lives. "Sarah," he said gently, "how would you feel about coming to visit Ace regularly? Maybe once a week? I think you two have something special, and I'd love to help you spend more time together." Sarah's face lit up with the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her since before her mother's death. She looked questioningly at Grandma Ellie, who was wiping tears from her eyes at witnessing her granddaughter's breakthrough. "I think that sounds wonderful," Grandma Ellie said softly. "If Officer Chen doesn't mind, and if it might help you, sweetheart." "It's settled then," Chen said. "Same time next week?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically and gave Ace one final hug. "See you next week," she whispered into his fur. "I promise I'll come back." As they walked away, Officer Chen stood watching them go, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd witnessed. This silent, traumatized child had a connection with his dog that defied explanation. And if Sarah could speak to Ace, even in whispers, perhaps there was hope for unlocking whatever information might be trapped in her memory about that horrible night. The following Tuesday couldn't come fast enough for Sarah. She'd spent the entire week drawing pictures of Ace, not the crime scene sketches that had become her signature, but happy drawings showing her and the German Shepherd playing together, working together, simply being together. When they arrived at the police station, Ace was waiting in the lobby as if he'd been expecting them. His tail began wagging the moment he spotted Sarah through the glass doors, and Officer Chen couldn't help but smile at the dog's obvious excitement. "Someone's been looking forward to this all week," Chen said, as Sarah practically ran to greet Ace. "I swear he's been checking the lobby every day around this time, as if he knew you were coming back." Sarah dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around Ace's neck. "I missed you so much," she whispered into his fur. "Did you miss me too?" Ace's enthusiastic tail wagging and gentle face licking suggested that, yes, he had definitely missed her too. Officer Chen had prepared something special for this visit. Instead of staying in the training room, he led Sarah and Ace outside to a small courtyard behind the police station, where the canine unit practiced more complex exercises. "I thought you might like to see what Ace can really do," Chen explained, as they settled on a bench in the sunshine. "His nose is about 10,000 times more sensitive than ours. He can detect scents that are days old, track people across miles of terrain, and find evidence that human investigators might miss completely." Sarah listened with rapt attention, her sketchbook open on her lap as she began drawing Ace in his working environment. Her artistic skills had always been impressive for a 10-year-old, but months of using art as her primary means of communication had refined her abilities remarkably. The ace she drew was anatomically perfect, captured in mid-motion with his nose to the ground and his entire body focused on his task. "Watch this," Officer Chen said, pulling a small cloth from his pocket. "I'm going to hide this somewhere in the courtyard, and Ace will find it using only his nose. Sarah, would you like to hide it for us?" Sarah nodded eagerly and took the cloth. Officer Chen pointed to the far side of the courtyard where several large planters created a maze-like area, perfect for hiding objects. "Put it anywhere you want, under something, behind something, wherever you think would be challenging." Sarah studied the area carefully, then walked over and tucked the cloth deep inside one of the planters, underneath several layers of decorative bark mulch. She returned to the bench and whispered to Ace, "That's going to be really hard to find." "Okay, Ace," Officer Chen commanded. "Find it." Ace immediately went to work, his nose scanning the air as he moved systematically across the courtyard. Sarah watched in amazement as the dog worked in a grid pattern, methodically checking each area before moving hidden cloth. He picked it up gently in his mouth and returned to Officer Chen, sitting proudly with his prize. "Incredible," Sarah whispered, clapping her hands silently. "How did he do that?" "Years of training," Chen explained, "but also natural instinct. German shepherds were bred to be working dogs, finding things, protecting people, solving problems. It's all part of who they are." Over the next hour, Sarah watched Ace demonstrate various skills, following scent trails, distinguishing between different people's odors, and even detecting when someone was trying to hide something. With each exercise, her drawings became more detailed and accurate, capturing not just Ace's physical appearance, but the intelligence and dedication that made him such an exceptional working dog. During their final exercise, something unexpected happened. Sarah had been drawing throughout the session, and when she finished her latest sketch, she held it up to show Ace the picture she'd created of him working. "Look, Ace," she whispered, "this is you being amazing." Ace approached the sketchbook and sniffed at the drawing, his nose working over the paper with the same intensity he'd shown during the scent exercises. Suddenly, his entire demeanor changed. His body went rigid, his ears snapped to attention, and he began the alerting behavior that indicated he'd found something significant. But he wasn't alerting to the drawing. He was alerting to Sarah herself. Officer Chen watched with confusion as Ace circled around Sarah, his nose working constantly, clearly detecting something that had triggered his training. Finally, Ace sat down directly in front of Sarah and stared at her jacket, a denim jacket that Grandma Ellie had bought for her at the beginning of the school year. "What is it, boy?" Chen asked, though he was already beginning to suspect. Sarah looked down at her jacket, then back at Ace. "What do you smell, Ace?" she whispered. "What did you find?" Ace whined softly and pawed gently at Sarah's jacket sleeve, not aggressively, but with the same careful attention he'd shown when investigating evidence at the crime scene 6 months earlier. Officer Chen felt his pulse quicken. "Sarah, have you worn that jacket to your house recently? Maybe when you went back to get some of your things?" Sarah nodded. She'd worn the jacket on several visits to collect belongings from her old home. But she'd also worn it that night, the night her mother was killed. It had been hanging in her closet when she'd grabbed a sweater to put on over her pajamas before the police arrived. Ace is detecting a scent from that night, Chen realized with growing excitement. "Sarah, your jacket might have picked up the scent of whoever was in your house. Ace remembers that smell, and he's telling us—" "You know who hurt Mommy," Sarah whispered to Ace. You've known all along, haven't you? Ace's tail wagged once, not with the playful enthusiasm he'd shown earlier, but with the controlled acknowledgement of a working dog who had found what he was looking for. Officer Chen made careful notes about the incident, though he wasn't entirely sure what it meant yet. What he did know was that the bond between Sarah and Ace had revealed something potentially crucial to the investigation, and that their weekly visits had just become much more than therapeutic sessions. They had become working partnerships between a silent witness and the one creature who truly understood what she had experienced. Dr. Williams had been skeptical when Grandma Ellie first suggested incorporating Ace into Sarah's therapy sessions. Animal-assisted therapy wasn't uncommon, but bringing an active police dog into a clinical setting raised questions about protocols and professional boundaries. However, after witnessing Sarah's remarkable progress during her visits to the police station, Dr. Williams agreed to a trial session. Officer Chen brought Ace to the therapist's office on a Thursday afternoon, transforming the usually quiet space into something alive with possibility. "Hello, Ace," Sarah whispered as the German Shepherd entered the familiar therapy room. The dog immediately went to her side, as if he understood that this was her special place for working through difficult emotions. Dr. Williams observed their interaction with professional fascination. In all her years of treating traumatized children, she'd never seen such an immediate and profound connection between a patient and a therapy animal. Sarah's entire posture changed when Ace was present. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing became deeper and more regular, and most remarkably, she began to vocalize, even if only in whispers directed at the dog. "Sarah," Dr. Williams said gently, "I'd like to try something different today. Instead of just drawing your feelings, I want you to show Ace your drawings from the past few months. Let him be part of understanding your story." Sarah nodded eagerly and opened her therapy portfolio, a large folder containing dozens of drawings she'd created during their sessions together. She spread several pictures across the floor, creating a visual timeline of her trauma and recovery. The early drawings were dark and chaotic, swirling blacks and grays, with small figures lost in overwhelming spaces. But as the weeks had progressed, the drawings had evolved. Colors had appeared. The small figure representing Sarah had grown larger, more defined, and increasingly, a four-legged companion had appeared beside her. "Tell Ace about this one," Dr. Williams suggested, pointing to a particularly detailed drawing from the previous month. "Sarah, I hid under my bed, and I saw the bad man leave our house." Ace studied the drawing intently, his nose working over the paper, as if he could detect the emotions that had gone into creating it. When Sarah pointed to the shadowy figure she'd drawn leaving through the back door, Ace's ears perked forward with interest. "But look at this one," Sarah continued, pulling out a more recent drawing. This picture showed the same scene, but now it included a German Shepherd searching through the house, investigating the crime scene with professional thoroughness. "This is you, Ace," Sarah whispered. "You were there that night, and you found things the police missed. You know the truth about what happened, don't you?" Dr. Williams leaned forward, her clinical training warring with her growing conviction that Sarah was trying to communicate something crucial through her art. "Sarah, when you draw Ace in these pictures, what is he doing?" Sarah pulled out her newest drawing, one she'd been working on all week. It showed Ace alerting to something specific, his body language indicating he'd found important evidence. But the evidence wasn't what the police had collected from the crime scene. Instead, Sarah had drawn Ace pointing toward something outside the house, something hidden in the shadows where no one had thought to look. "Show me, Ace," Sarah whispered, holding up the drawing. "Show me what you found that everyone else missed." To Dr. Williams's amazement, Ace responded to Sarah's request with professional seriousness. He approached the drawing and began his scent detection behavior, working his nose over the paper just as he would investigate a real crime scene. But then something extraordinary happened. Ace left the drawing and moved to Sarah's therapy bag, where she kept her art supplies and personal belongings. He began alerting to the bag itself, his tail rigid and his eyes focused with laser intensity. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, opening her bag to see what had captured Ace's attention. Inside the bag, along with her colored pencils and sketchbooks, was a small evidence bag that Detective Martinez had given Sarah weeks earlier. It contained a few of her mother's personal items that had been recovered from the crime scene: a bracelet, a hair tie, and a small fabric sample that had been found near the back door. Ace's reaction to the fabric sample was immediate and intense. He sat down and stared at the evidence bag with the same focused attention he'd shown when alerting to Sarah's jacket the previous week. Dr. Williams felt her breath catch. "Sarah, Ace is telling us that he recognizes something about that fabric. The scent on it matches something he's encountered recently." Sarah looked from Ace to the evidence bag, her young mind making connections that the adults had missed. "He smells the same smell on my jacket," she whispered. "The same smell from that night." The implications hit Dr. Williams like a physical blow. If Ace was reserved, detecting the same scent on Sarah's jacket that he'd found at the crime scene, it meant that Sarah had been in contact with her mother's killer. Recently, and probably more than once. "Sarah," Dr. Williams said carefully, trying to keep her voice calm despite her racing pulse, "I need you to think very carefully. Where have you worn that jacket? Who have you been around when you were wearing it?" Sarah closed her eyes, her face scrunched with concentration. "School," she whispered. "Therapy appointments, the police station, the courthouse when we met with the lawyers." Dr. Williams and Officer Chen exchanged meaningful glances over Sarah's head. The courthouse, where all the legal proceedings for the case were taking place, where suspects, witnesses, lawyers, and court personnel gathered regularly. Sarah seemed to read their thoughts. She pulled out her newest drawing, one she'd been working on in secret. This picture was different from all the others. Instead of showing the crime scene or her trauma, it depicted a courtroom filled with people. And in the middle of the crowd, Sarah had drawn Ace, in his alert position, pointing not at the defendant's table, but at someone else entirely. "Ace knows who really hurt Mommy," Sarah whispered, her voice growing slightly stronger with conviction. "And I think that person has been in the courtroom all along, pretending to help catch the bad guy." Dr. Williams stared at the drawing, her clinical mind racing through the implications. A killer hiding in plain sight, a dog who had been trying to tell them the truth for months, and a traumatized child who had been attempting to communicate crucial evidence through the only means available to her. "Sarah," Dr. Williams said gently, "I think it's time for us to have a conversation with Detective Martinez. And I think Ace needs to be part of that conversation too." Sarah nodded solemnly, then whispered to Ace, "Are you ready to help me tell them the truth?" Ace's tail wagged once, not with playful enthusiasm, but with the controlled confidence of a working dog who had finally been given permission to complete his most important mission. The partnership between the silent girl and the faithful dog was about to reveal secrets that would change everything. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday morning in October, 8 months after Elena Martinez's murder. Sarah was sitting at Grandma Ellie's kitchen table, carefully shading the ears of another Ace portrait, when Detective Martinez's voice filled the room through the speakerphone. "Mrs. Peterson, I wanted to call and let you know before you hear it on the news," Detective Martinez said, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We've made an arrest in Elena's case. We have the man who killed Sarah's mother in custody." Grandma Ellie's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, clattering against her saucer. Sarah's colored pencil froze mid-stroke, her dark eyes immediately focusing on the phone with laser intensity. "Who?" Grandma Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible. "Michael Thompson, 42 years old. He's a drifter with a criminal history, armed robbery, assault, breaking and entering. He was in the neighborhood that night, and we found some circumstantial evidence linking him to the scene." Sarah's stomach twisted into knots as Detective Martinez continued explaining the details. Thompson had been staying at a homeless shelter 3 blocks from their house. He had no alibi for the night of the murder. A witness had seen a man matching his description in the area around the time of Elena's death. But as Sarah listened to the explanation, something felt fundamentally wrong. She grabbed her sketchbook and began drawing frantically. Not her usual careful, detailed artwork, but desperate, urgent strokes that seemed to pour directly from her subconscious onto the paper. The figure she drew was completely different from the shadowy man she'd been sketching for months. Thompson, as she'd seen him on the news coverage that followed his arrest, was shorter and stockier than the person she remembered from that terrible night. His hair was different. His build was wrong. Everything about him felt like a mistake. "We'll need Sarah to identify him in a lineup," Detective Martinez was saying, "but that can wait until she's ready. The important thing is that he's off the streets and Elena can finally rest in peace." But Sarah was shaking her head vigorously, her drawings becoming more and more agitated. She drew Thompson behind bars, but then she drew her shadowy figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing that distinctive jacket. Still free, still dangerous, still out there. When the news broke that evening, Sarah and Grandma Ellie watched the coverage together on the living room television. The reporter stood outside the courthouse, detailing Thompson's arrest, while his mugshot filled the screen. He looked tired and defeated, with hollow eyes and graying hair that made him seem older than his 42 years. Police say that Thompson, who has been living in homeless shelters throughout the city, was identified by witness testimony and circumstantial evidence found at the crime scene, the reporter announced. The victim's daughter, who witnessed the crime, is expected to testify at trial. Sarah made a sound, not quite a word, but a noise of pure frustration that made Grandma Ellie look at her with concern. Sarah was drawing again, her pencil moving so fast it was almost tearing the paper. This time, she drew herself in a courtroom, pointing not at the defendant's table, but at an empty space where the real killer should be sitting. "Sweetheart," screen, then back to her drawing. She was trying to communicate something urgent, something crucial, but the adults around her weren't understanding. She drew Thompson again, but this time she put a big X over his figure and drew a question mark above his head. Then she drew her shadowy figure again, the real killer, and surrounded him with exclamation points. Grandma Ellie studied the drawings with growing concern.
"You don't think this Thompson man is the right person, do you, sweetheart?"
Sarah shook her head emphatically and pointed to her drawing of the tall figure in the jacket.
She tapped the paper insistently, then grabbed Grandma Ellie's hand and pressed it against the drawing as if she could transfer her certainty through touch.
"Oh, honey,"
Grandma Ellie said softly, pulling Sarah into a gentle hug.
"I know this is confusing and scary. Sometimes when we're traumatized, our memories can play tricks on us."
The police have been working on this case for months. They wouldn't arrest someone unless they were sure.
But Sarah knew they were wrong. She could feel it in every fiber of her being. In the same way she could sense Ace's emotions when they were together. The police had arrested an innocent man, while the real killer walked free. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling, and thinking about Michael Thompson, sitting in a jail cell for a crime he didn't commit.
She thought about her mother, about justice, about truth, and about the growing certainty that everyone was making a terrible mistake. Around midnight, she got up and crept to her desk, pulling out her sketchbook by the light of her small bedside lamp.
She began drawing the most detailed picture she'd ever attempted, a complete recreation of that terrible night, showing exactly what she'd seen from her hiding place under the bed. The drawing showed the back door of her house, the broken glass glittering in the moonlight, and the figure of a man leaving through that door. But this figure wasn't Michael Thompson.
This was someone taller, broader, wearing a jacket with a distinctive pattern that Sarah had tried to capture in dozens of previous drawings.
At the bottom of the page, in her careful 10-year-old handwriting, Sarah wrote her first words in 8 months. "This is not the right man." Meanwhile, across town in the county jail, Michael Thompson sat in his cell, staring at the concrete wall and wondering how his life had gone so wrong. He was guilty of many things: petty theft, vagrancy, making poor choices that had led him to life on the streets. But he had never hurt anyone, and he certainly hadn't murdered that poor woman.
His court-appointed attorney, Maria Rodriguez, had visited him that afternoon. She was young and overworked, handling too many cases with too little resources. But something in Thompson's eyes had convinced her that he was telling the truth about his innocence.
"I was at the shelter that night,"
Thompson had insisted, his weathered hands shaking as he spoke. "I had dinner at 5:30, watched TV in the common room until about 10, then went to bed. You can check with the other residents. They'll tell you I was there." But Ms. Rodriguez knew that testimony from homeless shelter residents wouldn't carry much weight with the jury. These were people struggling with addiction, mental illness, and their own legal troubles. Their word against the police department's evidence would be a difficult case to win. Still, as she drove home that night, Maria Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that Michael Thompson was being framed for someone else's crime. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if the real killer was smart enough to let an innocent man take the fall while he disappeared into the shadows forever. The thought made her stomach turn. If Thompson was innocent, then Elena Martinez's real killer was still out there, free to strike again, free to destroy other families, free to escape justice, while an innocent man rotted in prison. Ms. Rodriguez made a decision that would change the course of the case. She was going to fight for Michael Thompson's innocence, even if it meant going up against the entire criminal justice system. And, unknown to her, across town, a 10-year-old girl was making the same decision. Armed with nothing but colored pencils, stubborn determination, and the absolute certainty that the truth was still waiting to be discovered. The Riverside County Courthouse buzzed with activity as the case against Michael Thompson moved toward trial. Prosecutor David Blake, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and an impressive conviction record, had been assigned to handle what the media was calling the Martinez murder trial. Blake was known for his meticulous preparation and his ability to present complex cases in ways that juries could easily understand. Working alongside Blake was his assistant prosecutor, James Morton, a younger man who had joined the district attorney's office 2 years earlier. Morton was ambitious and hardworking, often staying late into the evening to review case files and prepare witness testimonies. His colleagues appreciated his dedication, and Blake had come to rely on him heavily for research and case preparation. "The evidence against Thompson is solid," Morton said during one of their strategy meetings, spreading crime scene photographs across the conference table. "We have witness testimony placing him in the neighborhood, we have his criminal history, establishing a pattern of break-ins, and we have the victim's daughter who can identify him." Blake nodded thoughtfully, reviewing the case file for what felt like the 100th time. "What about the girl's current condition? Is she going to be able to testify?" "That's the challenging part," Morton replied, his expression showing appropriate concern. "Sarah Martinez hasn't spoken since the night of the murder. She's been working with a therapist, but she communicates primarily through drawings and gestures." "Drawings," Blake mused. "What kind of drawings?" Morton pulled out a folder containing photocopies of some of Sarah's artwork from her therapy sessions, the ones that Dr. Williams had shared with the prosecution as part of Sarah's witness preparation. Mostly trauma-related imagery, Morton explained. She draws the same shadowy figure repeatedly, which our experts interpret as her mind's way of processing what she witnessed. The consistency of the imagery actually supports our case. She clearly saw someone that night, and that someone was Michael Thompson. Blake studied the drawings with professional interest. Sarah's artistic skill was remarkable for a child her age, and the emotional intensity of her work was both heartbreaking and compelling. These drawings would make powerful evidence in front of a jury, visual proof of the trauma this little girl had endured and her attempts to communicate what she'd witnessed. "Have you spent much time with the girl and her grandmother?" Blake asked. "I've attended most of the pre-trial meetings," Morton replied. "Mrs. Peterson is very protective of Sarah, understandably, and the girl seems to observe everything very carefully. She doesn't interact much with adults, but she's always drawing during our meetings." What Morton didn't mention was how those meetings affected him personally. Every time he saw Sarah's dark, watchful eyes, every time she looked at him with that intense, studying gaze, he felt a prickle of discomfort that he couldn't quite explain. The girl made him nervous in a way that seemed disproportionate to her age and silence. During the third pre-trial meeting, held in a conference room at the courthouse, Sarah sat beside Grandma Ellie with her ever-present sketchbook, quietly drawing while the adults discussed legal strategy. Detective Martinez was there, along with Blake, Morton, and Dr. Williams, who would be helping Sarah prepare for her testimony. "Sarah," Blake said gently, trying to establish rapport with his key witness, "I know this is difficult for you, but your testimony is going to be very important in making sure the person who hurt your mother faces justice." Sarah looked up from her drawing and nodded solemnly, but her eyes kept drifting to Morton, who was organizing papers at the far end of the table. Every time Morton moved around the room, Sarah's gaze followed him with an intensity that made Dr. Williams take notice. "Is everything okay, Sarah?" Dr. Williams asked quietly. Sarah returned to her drawing, but now she was sketching rapidly. The same figure she'd been drawing. Pencils snapped under the pressure of her grip, and she made a small sound, not quite a gasp, more like the intake of breath someone makes when they recognize something shocking. Morton paused, looking down at the broken pencil. "Sorry about that," he said with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Let me get you a new one." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pen, offering it to Sarah with a kind smile. But Sarah shrank back in her chair, her eyes wide with something that looked very much like recognition and fear. "It's okay, sweetheart," Grandma Ellie said soothingly, not noticing Sarah's reaction. "Mr. Morton is just trying to help." But Sarah was drawing again, her strokes more urgent than ever. She drew the figure in the jacket, but now she was adding details that made Dr. Williams lean forward with concern. The jacket pattern was becoming more specific, more recognizable, and the figure's posture suggested someone comfortable in formal settings, someone who belonged in courtrooms and legal offices. "Sarah," Dr. Williams said carefully, "can you tell me about this drawing?" Sarah looked up and pointed directly at Morton, who was now back at the other end of the table, reviewing witness statements with Blake. Then she pointed to her drawing, then back to Morton, her message clear even without words. But the adults misinterpreted her behavior. Dr. Williams assumed Sarah was simply showing her latest artwork to another adult in the room. Grandma Ellie thought Sarah was being polite by including Morton in their conversation. Even Detective Martinez, who had been trained to notice details, missed the significance of Sarah's pointed gestures. Only Morton himself seemed to understand what Sarah was trying to communicate, and the realization sent a chill down his spine. The girl was pointing at him. She was connecting him to her drawing. After 8 months of silence, this traumatized child was trying to tell everyone in the room that he was the figure from her nightmares. Morton's training as a prosecutor kicked in, and he maintained his professional composure even as his pulse quickened. He finished organizing his papers, made appropriate comments about witness preparation, and gave no outward sign of the panic building in his chest. But as the meeting concluded and everyone began gathering their materials, Morton made sure to position himself where he could observe Sarah more closely. She was still drawing, still glancing up at him with those knowing eyes, still trying to communicate something that could destroy his entire life. That night, Morton lay awake staring at the ceiling of his apartment, replaying every interaction he'd had with Sarah and her family over the past few months. He'd been careful, so careful, to maintain his cover as the dedicated assistant prosecutor working tirelessly to convict Elena Martinez's killer. But somehow, this silent child had seen through his deception. Somehow she knew. The question now was, what was he going to do about it? Maria Rodriguez had been a public defender for only 3 years, but she'd already developed a reputation for taking on cases that other attorneys avoided. She was passionate about protecting the rights of the indigent, the forgotten, and the falsely accused, which was exactly why Michael Thompson's case had captured her attention so completely. Something about Thompson's demeanor during their jail visits convinced Rodriguez that he was telling the truth about his innocence. She'd interviewed hundreds of defendants over the years, and she'd developed an instinct for distinguishing between genuine denial and manipulative lies. Thompson's confusion and distress felt authentic in a way that made her stomach churn with the possibility that the system was about to convict an innocent man. That's why she decided to visit Sarah Martinez and her grandmother personally, despite the potential awkwardness of a defense attorney approaching the victim's family. She needed to understand what Sarah had actually witnessed that night, beyond the prosecution's interpretation of her drawings and behavior. Grandma Ellie answered the door on a crisp Saturday morning, her expression politely cautious when Rodriguez introduced herself. "I know this might seem unusual," Rodriguez said carefully, "but I was hoping I could speak with you and Sarah about what she remembers from the night of the murder. I believe there might be some details that could help us understand what really happened." "The police already know what happened," Grandma Ellie replied, though her tone suggested some uncertainty. "They arrested the man responsible." "Mrs. Peterson, may I ask you something honestly? Do you believe, in your heart, that they arrested the right person?" Grandma Ellie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes studying Rodriguez's face for any sign of manipulation or false sympathy. What she saw was genuine concern and a determination that reminded her of her own granddaughter's stubborn pursuit of truth through her artwork. "Sarah doesn't think so," Grandma Ellie admitted finally. "She's been agitated ever since the arrest. Her drawings, they show someone completely different from the man they have in custody." Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. "Would it be possible for me to see some of those drawings? I promise I'm not trying to trick Sarah or put her through any additional trauma. I just want to make sure we're not missing something important." 15 minutes later, Rodriguez sat at Grandma Ellie's kitchen table while Sarah spread her artwork across the surface like pieces of a complex puzzle. The progression was remarkable. From the early chaotic drawings full of darkness and fear to the more represents what you saw that night. Sarah considered the question seriously, then selected one of her most recent drawings. It showed a tall figure in a suit jacket, leaving through the back door of a house. The jacket pattern was rendered with remarkable detail, a subtle geometric design that suggested expensive fabric and professional tailoring. "This person," Rodriguez said, pointing to the figure, "does he look like the man they arrested? Michael Thompson." Sarah shook her head emphatically and pulled out a newspaper clipping with Thompson's mugshot. She placed it next to her drawing, and the differences were obvious, even to a casual observer. Thompson was shorter, stockier, with different hair and completely different clothing style. "The man you saw was taller?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah nodded and stood up, stretching her hand above her head to indicate height. "And he was wearing a nice jacket, like a business suit?" Sarah nodded again, then began drawing a new picture. This one showed the same figure, but now she was placing him in different settings: an office, a courthouse, a meeting room. She was showing Rodriguez that the person she'd seen wasn't a homeless drifter, but someone who belonged in professional environments. Rodriguez studied the drawings with growing excitement and dread. If Sarah was accurate, then the real killer was someone with access to the legal system, someone who had been able to manipulate the investigation from the inside. "Sarah," Rodriguez said carefully, "have you seen this person since that night? Anyone who looks like the man in your drawings?" Sarah's response was immediate and dramatic. She began drawing frantically, creating a courtroom scene with multiple figures. She drew the judge, the jury, the defendant's table, where Thompson would sit, and the prosecution's table. Then she drew a figure standing beside the prosecution's table, tall, wearing a suit jacket with that same distinctive pattern. Rodriguez felt her breath catch. "Sarah, are you saying that the person you saw that night is someone who's been in the courtroom? Someone working on this case?" Sarah nodded vigorously, then pointed to herself and made a gesture that clearly meant, "I saw him there." Grandma Ellie, who had been watching this exchange with growing alarm, sat down heavily in her chair. "You're saying that Sarah has been in the same room as her mother's killer? That he's been right there pretending to help catch the person responsible?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. "It would explain how the investigation got misdirected toward Thompson. Someone with inside access could easily manipulate evidence, influence witness testimony, and ensure that suspicion fell on a convenient scapegoat." Sarah was drawing again, this time creating a picture that made Rodriguez's case file was in an alert position, also focused on the same area. "The police dog," Rodriguez said with sudden understanding. "Ace. You think he knows something too, don't you?" Sarah nodded eagerly and began drawing Ace in various scenes, searching the crime scene, investigating evidence, and repeatedly alerting to things that the human investigators had dismissed or overlooked. Rodriguez made a decision that would change the trajectory of the entire case. "Mrs. Peterson, I need to file a motion with the court. Based on what Sarah is showing me, I believe there's evidence that the prosecution may have missed or misinterpreted. I want to request that Ace be present during the trial proceedings." "The dog?" Grandma Ellie asked with surprise. "If Sarah is right, and if Ace has been trying to tell the investigators something they haven't understood, then having him in the courtroom might reveal information that could save Michael Thompson's life," Rodriguez explained. "Sarah seems to have a special connection with Ace. Maybe together they can finally communicate what really happened that night." Over the next week, Rodriguez worked tirelessly to prepare her motion. She interviewed Dr. Williams about Sarah's therapy sessions and her unique relationship with Ace. She spoke with Officer Chen about the dog's behavior during the investigation and his unusual bond with Sarah. She researched precedents for allowing service animals in courtroom settings for the comfort of traumatized witnesses. When she finally stood before Judge Harrison to present her request, Rodriguez felt the weight of Michael Thompson's life in her hands. "Your Honor," she began, "I'm requesting permission to have police dog Ace present during trial proceedings. The victim's daughter, Sarah Martinez, has developed a significant therapeutic relationship with this animal, and his presence may be crucial for her ability to provide accurate testimony." Prosecutor Blake objected, of course. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We're talking about a working police dog in a formal courtroom setting. The potential for disruption—" "Your Honor," Rodriguez interrupted, "this child witnessed her mother's murder and has been unable to speak for 8 months. If having this dog present might help her communicate what she saw, don't we owe it to the victim to explore every possible avenue for discovering the truth?" Judge Harrison considered the request for several long minutes, reviewing the psychological evaluations and witness statements that Rodriguez had submitted. Finally, he made his ruling. "Given the unique circumstances of this case and the potential therapeutic value for the witness, I'm going to allow police dog Ace to be present during Ms. Martinez's testimony, with appropriate handlers and safety precautions in place." Rodriguez felt a surge of victory, but also of apprehension. She'd gotten Ace into the courtroom, but now she had to hope that Sarah's instincts were correct, and that together, the silent girl and the faithful dog would finally reveal the truth about who had killed Elena Martinez. Meanwhile, across town, James Morton read about the judge's decision in the legal brief that landed on his desk that afternoon. His hands trembled slightly as he realized that his carefully constructed cover was about to be tested in the most dangerous way possible. The girl and the dog would be in the same room, with all eyes watching, all ears listening, and all minds focused on discovering the truth. Morton knew he was running out of time. The Riverside County Courthouse had seen many high-profile cases over its 50-year history, but the Martinez murder trial was generating unprecedented media attention. News vans lined the street outside the imposing brick building, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray November sky like mechanical sunflowers. Reporters clutched coffee cups and checked their equipment, preparing to cover what the local news had dubbed the silent witness trial. Inside the courthouse, preparations were underway for what everyone expected to be emotionally charged and legally complex proceeding. The courtroom itself, a solemn space with dark wood paneling and tall windows that filtered the autumn light, was being modified to accommodate the unique circumstances of Sarah's testimony. Court personnel had installed a special chair at the witness stand, sized appropriately for a 10-year-old. They'd arranged for additional security, knowing that the presence of a police dog in an active courtroom would require careful coordination. Most importantly, they designated a quiet room adjacent to the courtroom where Sarah could retreat if she became overwhelmed during the proceedings. Dr. Williams had been working intensively with Sarah for the past 2 weeks, trying to prepare her for the ordeal of testifying in front of a room full of strangers. Their practice sessions took place in Dr. Williams' office, where they role-played different courtroom scenarios using dolls and toy figures. "Remember, Sarah," Dr. Williams said during one of their final preparation sessions, "you don't have to use words if you're not ready. The judge has agreed to let you communicate through drawings, gestures, or any way that feels comfortable to you." Sarah nodded, but her artwork from these sessions revealed her deep anxiety about the upcoming trial. Her drawings had become more detailed and specific, showing not just the crime scene, but elaborate courtroom layouts with every seat, every table, and every person carefully positioned. It was as if she were creating a battle plan, mapping out the terrain, where the final confrontation would take place. "Can you show me who will be sitting where?" Dr. Williams asked, spreading out Sarah's latest courtroom drawing. Sarah pointed to different areas of the sketch with the precision of a military strategist: the judge's bench, the jury box, the defendant's table, where Michael Thompson would sit with Ms. Rodriguez. And then, with particular intensity, she pointed to the prosecution's table and drew a careful circle around one of the figures seated there. "That's where the prosecutor will sit," Dr. Williams said, misinterpreting Sarah's focus. "Mr. Blake and his assistant will be right there, working to present their case." But Sarah shook her head and tapped the circled figure more insistently. She picked up a red crayon and began adding details to this particular person: the height, the broad shoulders, the distinctive pattern she'd been trying to capture for months. This wasn't just any prosecutor. This was the man from her nightmares, the shadow who had stolen her mother and her voice. Meanwhile, across town at the police station, Officer Chen was conducting his own preparations with Ace. The German Shepherd had been in courtrooms before, but usually just for brief evidence presentations or demonstrations. This would be different: an extended period in a formal, crowded environment where his behavior would be scrutinized by judge, jury, and media. "Easy, boy," Chen said as he led Ace through a series of obedience exercises in the station's training room. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Lots of people, lots of distractions, but I need you to stay focused on Sarah. She's going to need you more than she's ever needed anyone." Ace responded to the commands with his usual professional precision, but Chen could sense something different in the dog's demeanor. There was an alertness, an anticipation that suggested Ace understood the significance of what was coming. Over their years of partnership, Chen had learned to read Ace's moods and instincts, and right now, every fiber of the dog's being seemed focused on an outcome that Chen couldn't quite comprehend. 3 days before the trial was scheduled to begin, Dr. Williams arranged for Sarah to visit the empty courtroom. The goal was to familiarize her with the environment, to reduce the anxiety of testifying in an unfamiliar space. What no one expected was how Sarah would use this opportunity to prepare for something far more complex than simple testimony. Sarah entered the courtroom with the focus of a general surveying a battlefield. She walked slowly through the space, her eyes taking in every detail: the height of the witness stand, the distance between the various tables, the sight lines from different positions in the room. She carried her sketchbook, of course, but today her drawings were different. Instead of emotional expressions or crime scene recreations, she was creating technical diagrams. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Grandma Ellie asked gently. "Does being here make you feel nervous?" Sarah shook her head and continued her methodical exploration of the courtroom. When Officer Chen arrived with Ace 20 minutes later, Sarah's behavior became even more purposeful. "Hi, Ace," she whispered, kneeling down to greet the German Shepherd. "Are you ready to help me tell everyone the truth?" Ace's tail wagged with what seemed like understanding, and Sarah began what could only be described as a briefing session. She led Ace around the courtroom, pointing to different locations and whispering instructions that only the dog could hear. "That's where the bad man will sit," she whispered, pointing to the prosecution table. "When he walks by there, you'll smell him again, won't you?" Officer Chen watched this interaction with growing fascination. Sarah was treating Ace like a partner in some complex operation, and the dog seemed to be following her instructions with the same attention he gave to official police commands. Sarah then did something that made everyone in the room take notice. She walked to the evidence table, the long wooden surface where physical evidence would be displayed during the trial, and began pointing to different spots while whispering to Ace. The dog sniffed carefully at each location she indicated, as if memorizing the scents and positions for future reference. "Show them what they missed," Sarah whispered to Ace, her voice barely audible but filled with determination. "When the time comes, show them what you tried to tell them before." Dr. Williams exchanged glances with Officer Chen. Neither of them fully understood what Sarah was planning, but it was clear that she viewed the upcoming trial not as an ordeal to endure, but as a mission to complete. As they prepared to leave the empty courtroom, Sarah did one final walkthrough, this time with Ace at her side. She pointed to the witness stand where she would sit, then to the prosecution table where her mother's killer would be sitting just a few feet away, then to the evidence table where the truth waited to be revealed. Her drawings that night were the most detailed architectural plans she'd ever created. Courtroom layouts so precise they could have been used by the court reporter to arrange furniture. But hidden within these technical drawings were strategic notations that revealed Sarah's true intentions. She had drawn arrows showing Ace's probable movement patterns through the courtroom. She had marked specific locations where scent evidence might be strongest. And, most tellingly, she had drawn herself not just as a witness giving testimony, but as someone pointing, directing attention, revealing secrets, finally breaking the silence that had protected her mother's killer for almost a year. Tomorrow would not be just a trial. Tomorrow would be Sarah's chance to complete the mission that had begun the night her world shattered, to make sure that justice found its way to the right person, no matter how well he had hidden himself in plain sight. The morning of the trial dawned gray and cold, with a November wind that rattled the windows of Grandma Ellie's house. A strange sense of anticipation, as if this day had been circled on some invisible calendar in her mind since the night her mother died. Grandma Ellie moved through their morning routine with careful attention to every detail that might provide comfort to her granddaughter. She prepared Sarah's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with a smiley face drawn in syrup, though Sarah could only manage a few bites. More importantly, she packed Sarah's special bag with items that had become essential to her sense of security over the past months. "Let's see," Grandma Ellie murmured, checking the contents of the soft purple backpack. "Your drawing pad, the good colored pencils, the stress ball Dr. Williams gave you, and—" She held up a small framed photograph of Elena that Sarah kept on her nightstand. "Would you like to bring Mommy's picture?" Sarah nodded solemnly and carefully placed the photograph in the front pocket of her backpack, where she could reach it easily. Having her mother's image close by felt like carrying a piece of strength she would need for what lay ahead. Dr. Williams arrived at 8:30, dressed in her most professional attire, but carrying the same warm, reassuring presence that had helped Sarah through so many difficult therapy sessions. She found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, putting the finishing touches on what appeared to be her most detailed courtroom drawing yet. "Good morning, brave girl," Dr. Williams said softly, taking a seat beside Sarah. "How are you feeling about today?" Sarah looked up from her drawing and pointed to her chest, then made a gesture like something was fluttering inside. Butterflies, Dr. Williams realized, but not the panicked kind that might send a child into hiding. These seemed like butterflies of readiness, of anticipation for something important. "I want you to remember something very important," Dr. Williams said, taking Sarah's hands in her own. "You are safe today. You are surrounded by people who care about you and want to protect you. Judge Harrison, Officer Chen, Ace, your grandmother, and me. We're all there to make sure you feel secure." Sarah nodded and then did something unexpected. She opened her drawing pad to a page she'd been working on the night before and showed it to Dr. Williams. The drawing depicted Sarah herself, but not as the small, frightened figure she'd drawn in earlier months. This Sarah stood tall and confident, one hand extended toward a courtroom full of people as if she were teaching them something they needed to understand. "You feel ready to tell your story," Dr. Williams said with quiet amazement. Sarah nodded again, then pointed to her throat and made a questioning gesture. "You're wondering who understood her better than words ever could." At the police station, Officer Chen was conducting his own final preparations with Ace. The dog seemed to sense the importance of the day. His usual playful energy was replaced by a focused intensity that Chen had only seen during the most serious investigations. "All right, partner," Chen said, adjusting Ace's official working vest. "Today we're going to help a very special little girl, and I have a feeling you're going to be the star of this show." Ace looked up at Chen with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to convey complete understanding. Over their years together, Chen had learned to trust Ace's instincts completely. And right now, every fiber of the dog's being seemed focused on the mission ahead. They drove to the courthouse with the windows cracked slightly, allowing the flow of air that helped Ace process the complex mixture of scents that would greet them at their destination. Chen noticed that as they got closer to the courthouse, Ace's alertness increased, his nose working constantly as if he were already beginning to sort through the important information that his incredible senses would provide. Meanwhile, in the prosecutor's office, the final strategy session was underway. David Blake sat at the head of the conference table, reviewing his opening statement one last time, while James Morton organized evidence boxes with the meticulous care that had made him such a valued assistant. "The key," Blake was saying to his team, "is to present this case with appropriate sensitivity for the child witness while still building a compelling argument for Thompson's guilt. We can't rely too heavily on Sarah's testimony since she hasn't spoken in months, but her drawings and behavior patterns support our timeline." Morton nodded appropriately, making notes on his legal pad while internally calculating how to navigate the dangerous waters ahead. Having Ace in the courtroom was a complication he hadn't anticipated, but he'd spent the weekend researching precedents and preparing contingencies. "What about the dog?" asked one of the junior prosecutors. "Any concerns about having an animal in formal proceedings?" "Judge Harrison was clear that Ace is there purely for the comfort of the witness," Blake replied. "He's not part of the evidence presentation. Officer Chen will maintain control at all times." Morton handled this part of the conversation with professional calm, but inside, his anxiety was building. He'd had several opportunities over the past months to observe Ace's behavior around various people connected to the case, and he'd noticed things that others had missed. The way the dog's attention focused when Morton was present, the subtle changes in Ace's posture when Morton moved around crime scenes or meeting rooms. Most troubling of all was the way Sarah looked at him, those dark, knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through his carefully constructed facade. Morton had become an expert at reading people over his years in the prosecutor's office, and he recognized recognition when he saw it. As the morning progressed and it came time to transport the evidence to the courthouse, Morton volunteered to help with the physical boxes. It was a normal part of his job, something he'd done dozens of times before, but today it served a dual purpose. He needed to handle the materials that would be presented at trial, needed to ensure that his scent would be on items that Ace might investigate. "Careful with that box," Blake said, as Morton lifted one of the heavier containers. "That's got the victim's personal effects and the fabric samples from the crime scene." Morton nodded and carried the box with appropriate solemnity, all while knowing that inside were items that could potentially destroy his career and his freedom if the right connections were made. As he loaded the boxes into the transport van, he noticed Officer Chen arriving with Ace in the parking garage below the courthouse. The dog was in full working mode, his attention scanning the environment with professional thoroughness. When Ace's gaze swept across the area where Morton was working, there was a moment, just a brief instant, where the dog's focus sharpened with what Morton could only interpret as recognition. Morton finished loading the evidence and headed into the courthouse, his mind racing through final preparations and potential contingencies. In a few hours, he would be sitting in a courtroom where his biggest threat was a silent 10-year-old girl and a German shepherd who might know more about Elena Martinez's murder than anyone realized. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent months building a case designed to convict an innocent man, while the real evidence of his guilt had been right there all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. By 9:30 a.m., the Riverside County Courthouse buzzed with an energy that veteran court personnel hadn't experienced in years. The Martinez trial had drawn not only local media, but regional news outlets, victim advocacy groups, and legal observers, curious about the unprecedented inclusion of a police dog in formal proceedings. The courtroom itself had been carefully prepared for the day's unique circumstances. Additional security officers were positioned at strategic locations, ready to maintain order if the presence of Ace created any unexpected disruptions. Court reporters had been briefed on the possibility that key testimony might come through non-verbal communication, requiring careful documentation of gestures, drawings, and behavioral cues. Judge Harrison entered through his private chambers 30 minutes before the scheduled start time, reviewing his notes on the special accommodations that would be needed. At 62, he had presided over thousands of cases, but none quite like this. Circumstances seemed to warrant flexible interpretation of courtroom protocol. Sarah arrived with Grandma Ellie at 9:45, entering through a side door that court personnel had designated to minimize her exposure to the media circus outside. Even with this precaution, Sarah could sense the magnitude of what was happening. The unusual number of people in the hallways, the hushed conversations that stopped when she passed, the weight of expectation that seemed to fill the air. The courtroom was already filling with spectators when Sarah entered. She paused in the doorway, her eyes scanning the scene with the same strategic assessment she'd shown during her preparation visits. The prosecution table was directly to her left, and her gaze immediately found James Morton, sitting beside David Blake with files and papers spread before him in perfect professional order. The moment Sarah spotted Morton, her entire demeanor changed. Her shoulders tensed, her breathing became more shallow, and her grip on Grandma Ellie's hand tightened noticeably. Dr. Williams, walking just behind them, immediately noticed Sarah's distress and moved closer to provide support. "It's okay, sweetheart," Grandma Ellie whispered. "Remember, we're all here to protect you." But Sarah's reaction wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was the intense focus of someone who had found their target. She pulled out her drawing pad and began sketching rapidly, her eyes moving between Morton and her paper as she captured details that had become crystal clear in this moment of direct confrontation. Morton, for his part, maintained his professional composure while acutely aware of Sarah's attention. He continued organizing his materials and consulting with Blake, but every fiber of his being was tuned to the little girl's presence across the room. When their eyes met briefly, Morton saw something that made his stomach clench with dread. Not the confused trauma he'd expected, but clear, determined recognition. Judge Harrison called the court to order at exactly 10 a.m., his voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the case of the People versus Michael Thompson. Before we proceed with opening statements, I want to address the special circumstances of this trial. The judge explained the accommodations that had been made for Sarah's testimony, including the presence of Dr. Williams as a support person and the upcoming arrival of police dog Ace. This court is committed to ensuring that all witnesses, regardless of age or circumstances, have the opportunity to present their testimony in an environment where they feel safe and supported. As if summoned by the judge's words, the courtroom doors opened and Officer Chen entered with Ace. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Magnificent German shepherd who walked with professional dignity beside his handler. Ace entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who belonged there, his intelligent eyes scanning the environment and cataloging the complex mixture of scents, emotions, and human energy that filled the space. But when his gaze found Sarah, sitting in the front row behind the prosecution table, everything else seemed to fade into background noise. Sarah's transformation was instant and remarkable. The tension in her shoulders relaxed, her breathing deepened, and for the first time since entering the courthouse, she smiled. A genuine expression of relief and connection that made Grandma Ellie's eyes fill with tears. "Hello, Ace," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, but carrying clearly in the sudden silence that had fallen over the courtroom. Officer Chen guided Ace to a designated area near the witness stand, where the dog settled into a calm but alert position. From this vantage point, Ace had clear sight lines to all the major participants in the trial: the judge, the jury box, both legal tables, and most importantly, Sarah herself. But as Ace settled into position, his professional training kicked into high gear. His nose began working systematically through the complex scent environment of the courtroom, processing and cataloging the human signatures of everyone present. When his attention swept across the prosecution table, his posture shifted slightly. Not enough for most observers to notice, but clear to Officer Chen, who had learned to read every subtle signal his partner provided. Morton, seated directly in Ace's line of sight, felt the dog's attention like a physical weight. Professional training told him to continue with normal courtroom behavior, but every instinct was screaming that his carefully constructed cover was about to be exposed by a 10-year-old girl and a German shepherd who had never forgotten the scent of Elena Martinez's killer. Sarah had her drawing pad open and was sketching rapidly, creating what appeared to be a real-time map of the courtroom. But this wasn't just documentation, it was preparation. She drew arrows indicating movement patterns, marked specific locations where she expected important moments to occur, and most tellingly, drew herself and Ace working together toward a common goal that the adults around them couldn't yet understand. "Mr. Blake," Judge Harrison said, "you may proceed with your opening statement." As the prosecutor rose to begin his case against Michael Thompson, Sarah closed her drawing pad and looked directly at Ace. The dog's eyes met hers across the courtroom, and in that moment of silent communication, both of them seemed to acknowledge that the real trial was about to begin. Not the formal legal proceeding that everyone else was focused on, but the final confrontation between truth and deception that had been building for almost a year. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Sarah Martinez was finally ready to break her silence in the most dramatic way possible. The trial opened with Prosecutor David Blake's calm yet commanding voice. He painted a picture for the jury, On March 15th, Elena Martinez was murdered in her home while her 10-year-old daughter hid upstairs. The accused, Michael Thompson, had a violent past and, Blake argued, broke in to rob and killed Elena when she resisted. From the front row, Sarah sketched quietly, her pencil capturing details others overlooked. The scatter of broken glass, the shifted furniture, the flash of a jacket vanishing through the back door. Detective Martinez testified to the forced entry, the signs of struggle, and the circumstantial case that had led them to Thompson. On cross-examination, defense attorney Maria Rodriguez exposed the absence of physical evidence tying him to the scene. At the evidence table, Officer Chen's canine partner, Ace, had been calm, until court aide James Morton began handling exhibits. The dog snapped into alert mode, tracking Morton with unwavering focus. Sarah noticed immediately and drew it. Ace rigid, ears pricked, eyes fixed. By afternoon, the defense brought character witnesses for Thompson, painting him as gentle and incapable of violence. Sarah's sketches grew urgent, focusing on Morton, surrounded by symbols of Ace's alert. When Sarah was called to testify, months of silence still gripped her voice, until she looked at Ace. Her first words rang through the courtroom. "Ace knows the truth." She stepped down, went to the dog, and whispered. At her command, Ace moved with precision to the evidence table, sniffing methodically. He stopped at a bag containing a torn jacket from the crime scene, then moved straight to Morton's chair, alerting hard on the prosecutor's jacket hanging there. Sarah pointed at him. "That man was at my house. Ace smells the same smell he smelled that night. He killed my mother." Gasps erupted. Morton tried to dismiss it, but when he grabbed his jacket, Ace's reaction intensified. His specific scent match vocalization. Morton panicked and bolted for the exit, only to be caught by bailiffs. The courtroom buzzed in shock. Sarah knelt by Ace, wrapping her arms around him. "Good boy, Ace. We did it." The German shepherd's tail thumped once, the job complete. Justice, long buried, had been brought into the light by a child who found her voice and the dog who never stopped searching. The courtroom was still, the air taut after James Morton's desperate attempt to flee. Judge Harrison, his decades on the bench tested like never before, called for a recess. But before the gavel could fall, a clear, young voice rose. "Please," said Sarah Martinez, breaking 8 months of silence. "I need to tell everyone," beside the alert German shepherd Ace. "Miss Martinez," he said, both gentle and authoritative, "if you're ready, this court is ready to listen." Dr. Williams approached the stand, worried about the toll this might take, but Sarah shook her head. "I'm okay. I need to do this for Mommy." She climbed into the witness chair with a new posture, no longer a frightened child, but someone ready to speak the truth. "That night," she began, "Mommy and I were reading Charlotte's Web when we heard glass breaking downstairs. She went to check. She sounded scared. I hid under my bed, like she taught me." Her eyes locked on Morton, now pale between 2 bailiffs. "I heard a man talking about money and insurance. Then Mommy screamed. It got quiet. When the man left, I saw him through the back door, tall, wearing a jacket with squares and lines, moving like he knew what he was doing." Maria Rodriguez, Michael Thompson's defense attorney, felt her pulse quicken. Sarah's description fit Morton exactly, not her client. Sarah went on. "I kept seeing him in court. I recognized his smell, the way he moved. Ace recognized it too." Officer Chen suddenly understood the months of subtle alerts from Ace. "Sarah, are you saying Ace has been trying to identify Mr. Morton this whole time?" "Yes. when he found that scent on the picture frame, when he kept alerting to my jacket. It all smelled like the man from that night. And today, when Mr. Morton touched the evidence, Ace knew. The realization hit the courtroom like a shockwave. For 8 months, the dog had been telling them the truth, misread at every turn. Lead prosecutor David Blake sat frozen as the betrayal sank in. Mr. Morton had access to everything. He could have steered the case away from himself. Morton broke. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I needed money for my gambling debts. The plan was simple. Make it look like a burglary, collect the insurance, and disappear. Gasps filled the room. Judge Harrison advised him of his rights, but Morton couldn't stop talking. Elena, he admitted, was going to change the beneficiary. She recognized me. She was going to call the police. I panicked. Michael Thompson finally found his voice. I've been in jail for 8 months for something I didn't do. All charges against you are dismissed, the judge declared. Sarah looked at Thompson. I'm sorry it took so long. You saved me at the right time, he told her, tears streaking his face. The weight Sarah had carried for months lifted. The truth was finally out. Within hours, the district attorney's office launched a sweeping internal investigation, inquired about Elena's insurance within days of the murder. He had been a secondary beneficiary, established during a brief romance 6 months before her death. Other cases began to unravel, evidence gone missing, witnesses recanting. 3 prior prosecutions now looked suspicious. The revelation shook the legal community. Bar associations called for reform. Witnesses came forward with troubling stories about Morton's behavior. In custody, Morton admitted to targeting Thompson because he was perfect, a man the system could easily convict. His arrogance was chilling, but he hadn't counted on Sarah and Ace, whose instincts and courage broke his illusion of the perfect crime. 3 weeks later, the Riverside Police Department held a ceremony that drew national attention. Police Chief Margaret Rodriguez addressed the crowd. We honor a partnership between human intuition and canine instinct, between courage and loyalty, a child who refused to give up, and a dog who never stopped searching for the truth. Ace sat at perfect attention beside Officer Chen, eyes always drifting towards Sarah in the front row. Canine Officer Ace, the chief said, you are awarded the Medal of Exceptional Service for your persistence in identifying crucial evidence. Your dedication exemplifies the highest standards of police work. Sarah stood applauding through tears. Ace had been more than a hero. He helped her find her voice. Officer Chen was commended for trusting Ace's instincts and fostering Sarah's connection with him. Detective Martinez was honored for reopening the investigation. Dr. Williams was recognized for helping Sarah prepare for her testimony. Maria Rodriguez received praise for refusing to accept a false conviction. Michael Thompson, now free, thanked everyone who believed in him, especially Sarah. She gave me back my freedom, he said. When Sarah took the podium, she carried a drawing of Ace, capturing his intelligence and loyalty. He never gave up, even when no one understood. He protected me and helped me speak again. Sometimes the truth is hard to see, but if we keep trying, justice can happen. Her words rippled far beyond the hall. Advocacy groups cited her case as proof of the need to listen to young witnesses. Police agencies began adopting the Sarah Martinez Protocol, prioritizing comfort and communication for vulnerable witnesses. Letters poured in from children inspired by her courage. The Riverside community rallied around her. A college fund was established, scholarships created in Elena's memory, and the local school launched a therapy dog program. The most personal moment came after the ceremony, when Officer Chen knelt beside Sarah. When Ace retires, he said, would you and your grandmother adopt him? Sarah hugged the dog's neck. Yes. We want to be a family forever. Later, she sat with Ace in a quiet corner, sketching a girl and a dog walking toward a sunny horizon. The truth was out, justice served, and Sarah Martinez had discovered her voice was only the beginning of making the world better. The drive home from the ceremony was quiet, but not the heavy silence of the past 8 months. This was a peaceful stillness, the kind that follows something monumental. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her medal resting in her lap, watching Riverside roll by. At the house, Grandma Ellie cut the engine but didn't move. At 72, she'd lived through a lot, but nothing compared to watching her granddaughter stand in court 3 weeks ago and tell the truth. "Grandma Ellie?" Sarah's voice was tentative, as if testing its strength. "Yes, sweetheart." "Can we talk, really talk, about everything?" Ellie's eyes filled. "Oh, my dear girl, I'd love nothing more." On the floral couch in their sunlit living room, Sarah's words tumbled out. "I'm sorry I couldn't talk to you. Every time I tried, the words were trapped inside my chest." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Ellie said, smoothing her hair. "Your mind was protecting you the only way it knew how." "But you must have been lonely. You lost Mommy, too, and had to take care of me." Ellie's tears came then. "You were never a burden. You were my purpose." After a pause, Sarah asked, "Do you think Mommy would be proud for finding my voice and helping catch the bad man?" Ellie cupped her face. "She'd be so proud, she'd cry happy tears every day." For an hour they traded memories, bedtime reading, awful but wonderful singing, Saturday kitchen dancing. Sarah realized her mother's belief in her had kept her pushing to be heard. Then Sarah ventured, "Do you think we could keep seeing Ace? Officer Chen said we could adopt him when he retires." "If it helps you heal, we'll make it happen," Ellie said. That night, Sarah drew a picture of herself, Ellie, and Ace on the couch, talking and laughing. It was the family they were building. 2 weeks later, Sarah walked back into Roosevelt Elementary. Mrs. Patterson had prepared her classmates and eased the day with art-centered activities. When Sarah spoke, "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," it was the first many had heard her voice in months. Jessica Chen, her old best friend, told her she'd never stopped being her friend. "Me neither," Sarah replied. She shared drawings from her healing journey, explaining Ace's role in helping her feel safe. Marcus asked if she hadn't wanted to talk. "I wanted to," she said, "but it felt like the words were stuck." Emma asked if Ace really helped. "He understood me, even when I couldn't speak."
Even if it takes a long time for people to understand. When Ellie picked her up, Sarah glowed. "I think I want to help other kids be brave. Maybe start an art therapy club." The local news feature on her return to school brought an outpouring, calls from advocacy groups, families, and most movingly, hundreds of letters. From Oregon, "I haven't talked at school since my daddy died, but your story makes me think I can try again." From Michigan, "I told my parents about something scary because you inspired me. They believed me." From a trauma center in California, "You are our hero. We're working to find our voices like you did." The Riverside Community Foundation launched the Sarah Martinez Courage Fund to help traumatized children. Donations poured in from bake sales to police fundraisers. Then came an invitation from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Sarah would be the youngest speaker in its history. "I'm nervous," she told Dr. Williams. "Just speak from your heart," he said. "That's your strength." Soon, Sarah and Ace began visiting schools, showing how therapy animals help children feel safe enough to speak.
At Roosevelt's assembly, Sarah told the students, "Animals like Ace don't judge. They understand feelings even when we can't put them into words." Officer Chen demonstrated Ace's skills, but the most powerful moments came when children knelt to whisper to the dog. Some shared secrets they hadn't told adults. At a school for children with special needs, Sarah showed how communication could be pictures, gestures, or feelings, not just words. "Ace understands them all," she said. Within 3 months, they'd reached over 2,000 children. Teachers reported students speaking up more, parents saw communication improving, and counselors noted more children seeking help. Districts nationwide began adopting the Sarah Martinez Protocol for working with vulnerable witnesses. At home one night, reading through another stack of letters, Sarah told Ellie, "I think Mommy would like knowing something good came from something so bad." Ellie hugged her tightly. "She'd be incredibly proud, and she'd love knowing you and Ace are making the world safer for children." 6 months after her dramatic courtroom testimony, Sarah Martinez stepped into the Riverside Police Department with a confidence that once felt impossible. She was there to begin her new role as the department's youngest ever junior volunteer with the K-9 unit, a position created to honor her unique insights and extraordinary bond with Ace. Police Chief Margaret Rodriguez greeted Sarah and Grandma Ellie in the lobby, presenting a small badge and certificate. "Sarah, it's my pleasure to welcome you as our junior K-9 volunteer. Your work with Ace and your understanding of how traumatized children communicate have already made a difference." Sarah accepted them with quiet solemnity.
Thank you. I'll work hard and help however I can. Officer Chen appeared with Ace, whose tail lifted the moment he saw her. Their bond had grown from therapy necessity to professional partnership and friendship. Sarah's first assignment was observing the training of new police dogs, advising on approaches that could help with young witnesses. When she noticed a young German shepherd named Rex, tense under firm commands, she suggested softening the tone. The result was immediate. Rex focused, relaxed, and performed better. "Animals hear more than words," Sarah explained. "They hear how safe you make them feel." Her methods shaped new K-9 protocols: patience, gentle communication, and allowing children to initiate contact. This philosophy also guided Ace's transition from active patrol to therapy work with child witnesses. Sarah worked with veterinary behaviorists and child psychologists to prepare dogs for this role, teaching them to read anxiety cues, offer comfort, and give children control over interaction. Her skills soon reached beyond law enforcement. Riverside General Hospital invited Sarah and Ace to work with children suffering from selective mutism and trauma. Their first visit was to Marcus, an 8-year-old who hadn't spoken since witnessing his father's death. Sarah admired his drawings, asked permission to bring Ace closer, and shared that she, too, once felt unsafe speaking. Within minutes, Marcus whispered, "Hi, dog," his first words in 3 months. Sarah's art and animal approach opened breakthroughs with children others couldn't reach: abuse victims, witnesses to violence, and accident survivors. 9-year-old Emma whispered enough details to secure prosecution against her abuser. 12-year-old David began to speak about domestic abuse after Sarah explained how telling the right people could keep others safe. Dr. Park formalized the methods into the Sarah Martinez Child Advocacy Protocol, now used in hospitals nationwide. Sarah began traveling to train medical staff, police, and therapy dog handlers. The work also transformed Sarah. She joined the school debate team, winning competitions with her first topic: the value of therapy animals in schools. Her poise led to keynote invitations, including the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's annual conference. There, she told her story. I lost my voice for 8 months because speaking felt dangerous. Children who can't speak aren't difficult. They're protecting themselves. With the right support, they can find their voices. Her testimony before the state legislature helped pass a bill increasing victim services funding. Legislators credited her words as decisive. At school, Sarah started an art therapy club, advocated for animal-assisted support, and convinced the principal to allow child advocacy, declaring her goal to become a prosecutor specializing in cases involving children.
I want to be the kind of prosecutor who listens to kids like I used to be,
she told classmates.
By then, I hope our systems are so strong, no child has to stay silent as long as I did.
By the end of 6th grade, the girl who once hid under her bed was shaping policy, guiding therapy programs, and giving a voice to children across the country. Proof that the worst night of her life had been transformed into a mission to heal others, one child at a time. The courthouse steps where Sarah Martinez had once climbed in terrified silence were now the stage for a celebration of one of Riverside's most remarkable transformations. Exactly 1 year after her breakthrough testimony exposed James Morton's crimes and freed an innocent man, Sarah stood tall before a crowd of community members, law enforcement, and media. At the podium, Police Chief Margaret Rodriguez held a commendation. 1 year ago, a brave young woman found her voice right here and changed the course of justice for our city. Beside Sarah stood Ace, wearing his formal dress uniform with the dignified bearing of a veteran. Their bond had only deepened over the year. No longer just therapy partners, but true teammates. Sarah Martinez, the chief continued, your courage surpasses that of many adults in law enforcement. Today, we present you with the Medal of Exceptional Courage. The crowd erupted in applause as Sarah accepted the medal. I didn't find my courage alone, she said, voice steady. Ace was with me every step of the way, and so many adults helped me feel safe enough to try. Then Rodriguez turned to Ace. Canine Officer Ace, your dedication and patience exemplify the highest standards of police work. Today, you receive the Distinguished Service Medal. Officer Chen accepted it, but the truest honor came when Sarah knelt and fastened a special collar decoration. We did it, boy, she whispered. Michael Thompson, the man freed because of her testimony, stepped forward. Sarah, you gave me back my life and showed me what real courage looks like. Thompson now worked as a peer counselor, helping others rebuild. Meanwhile, Morton faced life in prison, his downfall prompting statewide reforms in evidence handling and victim support. Dr. Williams, Sarah's therapist, told the crowd, Sarah didn't just heal, she turned her trauma into a force for helping others. Among the attendees was Marcus Chen, once a silent hospital patient who now spoke freely. Sarah taught me it's okay to be scared, but not okay to stay quiet when someone needs help. The idea for Sarah's children's book came during a hospital visit, when a 7-year-old asked if there were any stories about kids who couldn't talk but were still brave. Sarah realized there was nothing like that, so she decided to create one. At her grandmother's kitchen table, she wrote and illustrated The Little Girl Who Whispered to Dogs, the story of Maya, who lost her voice after a frightening event, but healed through a bond with a therapy dog named Hero. The illustrations, drawn from Sarah's own experiences, showed Maya's journey from fear to confidence, ending with her speaking before a room of adults with Hero beside her. Child psychologist Dr. Amanda Foster praised it. It feels authentic because it is authentic. The book's release led to school visits across the country. In Denver, Sarah read to 400 students as Ace demonstrated therapy techniques. Maya and Hero are fictional, she told them, but their story is based on real things Ace and I went through. Children responded with confessions, questions, and their own stories. One third grader asked if a dog could help her talk again after her father's arrest. Sarah's answer: different things help different people feel safe enough to talk. For me, it was Ace. These visits grew into full programs: student assemblies, teacher workshops on trauma, counselor training for animal-assisted therapy, and resource fairs for families. Schools began adopting Sarah Martinez protocols for supporting traumatized students. Letters poured in from children who sought help after hearing her speak, some even forming hero clubs for kids who had been through hard times. One afternoon at the police station, Officer Chen called Sarah into his office. "Ace is 9 now," he said gently. "Most police dogs retire at 10. I was hoping you might be interested in giving him a home and continuing your work together, just not in an official police capacity." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You mean he could live with us forever? If your grandmother agrees." She dropped to her knees beside Ace. "We get to be a real family boy." His tail thumped in approval. The adoption process took weeks: paperwork, health checks, behavior consultations. At home, Grandma Ellie asked, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "Ace saved my life," Sarah replied. "Taking care of him isn't just something I want to do, it's something I need to do." At the small handover ceremony, Chen passed her Ace's leash. "Take care of each other," he said. Retirement didn't slow Ace down. He settled into life beside Sarah's bed, took morning walks, and still worked therapy sessions with children. Freed from patrol duties, he focused entirely on helping kids heal. Sarah formalized their civilian work: hospital visits, school programs, private family sessions, and training other children in therapy animal skills. Dr. Park from Riverside General observed, "They've proven the boundaries between found something even better than justice, Ace. We found purpose." Ace's brown eyes seemed to agree. Girl and dog, partners still, were ready to help countless more children find their voices and their own paths to healing. On a crisp September morning, 2 years after her dramatic courtroom testimony, 12-year-old Sarah Martinez stood at the entrance of Riverside Memorial Cemetery, clutching yellow roses, her mother Alina's favorite. Ace, her steadfast German Shepherd partner, waited by her side. It had taken Sarah this long to return, not from avoidance, but because she wanted to face her mother as someone who had fulfilled the dreams Elena had for her. Today marked that moment. She walked past silent headstones to the simple, beautiful grave she had chosen the inscription for. "Beloved mother and daughter, her love lives on." Sitting cross-legged on the grass, with Ace settling beside her, Sarah whispered, "Hi, Mommy. I needed to have something important to tell you first." She spoke of the trial, of finding her voice, of Ace's role in bringing James Morton to justice. But she lingered on the quiet victories, helping children, influencing programs, turning her own pain into a lifeline for others. Pulling out her sketchbook, she showed her mother a favorite drawing: herself, Ace, and dozens of children with hands raised to share their truths. "Ace wants me to tell you about our plans," she smiled. "We'll keep helping kids who can't speak about what's happened to them. Someday, I'll be a prosecutor who protects their voices." From a nearby bench, Grandma Ellie watched with pride. The silent child who'd come to live with her had become a young leader. Sarah's grades were high, but her gift for helping others shone brightest.
That fall, Sarah's work with Ace brought them to 8-year-old Maria Santos, a witness to her brother's gang-related murder who hadn't spoken in months. Approaching in Spanish, Sarah slowly gained her trust. Within an hour, Maria whispered details to Ace, information that led to the arrest of 2 suspects. More importantly, Maria began therapy, starting her own path to healing. The case prompted the Riverside Police Department to launch the Child Witness Advocacy Program, with Sarah as its first junior consultant. She trained officers nationwide, teaching that silence in children wasn't defiance, but self-protection. At just 12, she was shaping police academy curricula, social work training, and child advocacy protocols. Solving crimes and healing trauma can be the same goal, she told one group of officers, Ace at her side for live demonstrations. By the following year, Sarah stood backstage at the National Conference on Child Advocacy in Washington, D.C., preparing to address to another human being. I had witnessed my mother's murder, and my voice was trapped by fear. Her talk outlined 3 principles. Meet children where they are emotionally, use alternative communication methods, and practice patience in uncovering the truth. Her stories, like Maria's breakthrough, moved the audience. She highlighted the role of therapy animals, calling Ace the bridge between my silence and my purpose. Her closing words resonated. Our survival can become our service to others. The ovation was long and loud, but Sarah valued most the young survivors who approached afterward. You proved that kids can be experts too, one told her. Sarah answered, truth always finds a way, sometimes through partnerships we never expected. Leaving the hotel, Sarah and Ace passed the Capitol, the Supreme Court, the Lincoln Memorial. You know what, Ace? She said, glancing at the carved words about government for the people. That includes kids too. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones that almost got lost. The story that began in terror had become a testament to healing partnerships and voices found in darkness. Sarah knew her mother's love lived on, in every child she helped, every truth she uncovered, and every bridge she built between silence and strength. Sarah and Ace's journey reminds us of something beautiful, the extraordinary connection between humans and dogs that transcends words. German shepherds, with their loyal hearts and intuitive souls, don't just serve as companions, they become family, protectors, and healers in ways we're only beginning to understand. Ace didn't just help solve a crime, he helped heal a broken heart, restore a lost voice, and transform tragedy into hope. Their bond shows us that our dogs see beyond our wounds to our potential, offering unconditional love when we need it most. Every dog owner knows this magic, that moment when your faithful companion seems to read your heart, offering comfort without being asked. It's a reminder that the relationship we share with our dogs is sacred, built on trust, loyalty, and an understanding that runs deeper than language. If you've ever wondered about strengthening that special connection with your own loyal companion, there's a gentle approach that many dog lovers have found meaningful. It's worth exploring if your heart tells you it's time, because every dog deserves to be truly understood, and every owner deserves that deeper bond.